Episode 2 of the history of Arrowhead Springs deals with the white settlers coming into the San Bernardino area and how their system of land ownership changed Arrowhead Springs forever.
This book, Arrowhead Springs, California's Ideal Resort, is the definitive work on Arrowhead Springs. The author, Mark Landis, is a freelance writer for local newspapers in the Inland Empire and loves our local history. This book is a must for learning the history of the Arrowhead, the Springs, and the resorts. You can get a copy at landispublications.com.
They believe that the first known notice of the San Bernardino area is in 1542 when the explorer Juan Cabrillo's ships anchored in Santa Monica Bay noticed that there were two snow-covered mountain peaks far to the east. It is widely believed the two peaks to be Mount San Bernardino and Mount San Gorgonio. In 1774 Juan de Anza came through the area with an expedition on the way to the San Gabriel mission. There was no mention of the Arrowhead. Whether the expedition was close enough to see it is not known for sure. In 1819 the Padres at the San Gabriel mission sent people into the San Bernardino Valley to choose a place to establish an outpost of the mission. They chose the native settlement in Loma Linda, known as the Guachama Rancheria. The settlement was known as the Estancia. Historical writings that have been studied tell that the people at the Estancia documented the hot and cold water springs at the Arrowhead, but not the Arrowhead itself. In 1826 the famous American trapper and explorer Jedediah Smith and his party came over the San Bernardino Mountains, into the valley. He was the first American to reach California overland. What they reached at this time was Mexico. California was known as Alta California. The Mexican governor detained the party for 2 months while they investigated why these men had come to Alta California. Upon leaving the San Gabriel mission, they stopped again in the San Bernardino Valley at the Estancia to rest and refit before heading back east. The Jedediah Smith party did not make any reference to the Arrowhead. There is a story that Mormon leader Brigham Young could have been the first person known to mention the Arrowhead by name. The story goes on to say that he sent the Mormon colony to Southern California to set up a place to serve as an outpost between Utah and the Pacific Ocean. And he told the wagon train leaders to look for a mountain with an arrowhead on it. It seems this story had to be made up after the fact, since he actually sent them to buy the Rancho del Chino, and when that didn't happen, they then purchased the San Bernardino Rancho and settled there. It appears as though the Arrowhead landmark was referred to as the Ace of Spades by local settlers, before the term Arrowhead came into the young town's vocabulary. Huntington Township, Ohio, is the place that sent San Bernardino the man who gave the Ace of Spades a new name. The Arrowhead. David Noble Smith was born in Huntington, Ohio on December 10, 1831. In a San Bernardino Sun newspaper article, Mark Landis explains that David traveled across the United States in the 1850s and made his way to San Bernardino in 1857. The disease of tuberculosis played a huge role in David's life. He lost family members to it, including his father. This set in motion the course of the rest of David's life. Tuberculosis was known in the 1800s as consumption, and was responsible for killing many people in America. Mark Landis explains in his book that watching his father die of it probably helped nurture David's deep-seated superstitions and belief in spiritualistic healing.
spiritualism became popular in the 19th century. One of the main tenets of the movement was the practice of contacting and communicating with the dead through mediums and seances. The movement was condemned by the traditional Christian denominations, likening it to necromancy.
It appears that when David Noble Smith arrived in San Bernardino, he was operating a traveling store. 1857 was the year that Mormon leader Brigham Young recalled the Mormon colony back to Utah. He was expecting a war with the United States Army after the Mountain Meadows Massacre. David entered the city at a very tumultuous time. Not long after arriving in San Bernardino, David met and took a liking to John Brown Sr. John was a successful pioneer and businessman. He was a famous mountain man with a very colorful life and would play a big role in David's story. According to Mark Landis, David met John at a séance. They both were in the spiritualist movement. It seems that David was in awe of John's powers as a medium. It was the start of a long relationship between the two settlers. John Brown wrote a book titled, John Brown, the Medium of the Rockies. I found a copy of a faded photo of the cover of his book. David became a firm believer in John's spiritual powers, and as Mark Landis writes that David wrote down that John could raise the dead. After he claimed that indeed he brought back to life a young boy who had died. The two spiritualists had become fast friends. In fact, John Landis wrote that in the 1860 U.S. Census that David was listed as living in John's home. Mark Landis explains in his book that both Smith and Brown believed the springs below the Arrowhead to possess healing qualities. And before exploring its possibilities, the whole area was rocked by the discovery of gold in a small valley north of Bear Valley by William Holcomb. The year was 1860 and the San Bernardino Mountains became the destination of thousands of miners. In fact, this old photo has William Holcomb and John Brown Sr. together. William is standing left and John is standing center. The healing waters of the Arrowhead had to wait for David's attention. He, like so many others, headed for the Holcomb Valley to strike it rich mining for gold. David ended up mining in an area known as Uniontown. When he did not hit the mother lode, David returned to San Bernardino and hooked up again with his friend John Brown. He helped John with his new business venture, a toll road through the mountains. In 1861, John Brown built a toll road in the Cajon Pass. It went through Crowder Canyon and met up with the Van Dusen Road in the desert. This map shows in red the route of the toll road and the locations of the toll booths. The yellow shows today's highways, including Interstate 15. After David returned from his time mining in the mountains, he helped John operate the toll road in the pass. There was an attack by Indians and David and another man made it to safety. Although David was seriously injured, he turned his attention back to the springs at the Arrowhead and how to turn it into a treatment facility for consumption. The story goes that at the death of David's father, he saw that he would be guided to a place by a special sign to where he would treat and conquer consumption. The story goes on to say that he realized that the arrowhead protruding out of the mountain was that sign, and the springs below would be the cure. 1863 is the year that life at the Arrowhead Springs was changed. David started putting up wooden buildings on the land. He was successful in convincing others in his and the springs' ability in treating diseases. The native peoples had been driven from this area, plus David now living on the land would change the way the area was used forever. Later in 1865, David actually homesteaded 160 acres of the main plateau, centered around where the hotel sits today. This photo from sbcity.org showed David and John together. It is the only one that I have seen. It is suggested that it was taken in 1864, and the next slide shows the photo in its entirety. This is believed to be the very first known photo of the arrowhead. Here is another old photo showing the infirmary in its early days. The San Bernardino website dates this one to 1870. About the time that David started treating people with the spring waters, he started referring to himself as a doctor. It appears that in those days one could get away with a self-imposed MD title. For those of us who grew up in and around San Bernardino, Waterman Avenue was a household name. Everyone knew that Waterman Avenue went the whole way across the San Bernardino Valley up to Waterman Canyon. I always thought that the name had to do with water coming down out of the canyon. However, I was wrong. It was named after California Governor Robert Waterman, and for a time he had owned property next to the Arrowhead Springs. There was built a sanitarium on his land. For a while this gave David some competition in water spring therapy. In time the Waterman sold out and moved away. David was married 3 times. It seems 2 of his wives came from his clientele. His second wife was abandoned at the infirmary by her husband at the time for not being able to keep house and wifely duties. His third wife was widowed by a patient who died and asked David to look after her. He finally had children with his third wife. David tried to keep up with his patients' needs, treating many different kinds of diseases and ailments. One improvement was a pond he dug in front of the main building. Over time he started advertising the springs in papers, and he got a lot of good press from reporters and patients alike. One fact is that whatever he tried, the infirmary never seemed to make much profit. Hydrotherapy was the specialty at Arrowhead Springs. It's no wonder with the hot water springs, cold water springs, as well as the steam that was abundant on his property. This treatment was starting to be used all over America and in Europe. Thank you for joining me for episode 2 of the history of Arrowhead Springs. In the next episode, we will say goodbye to the good Dr. David Noble Smith and say hello to the hotel era of Arrowhead Springs.